Okay, folks, let's get started here. I'd like to thank you all for attending this early on a Thursday morning. I hope you all made it here safely. I guess that's the way it works out for everybody who's trying to attend a 100,000 plus person event. I'd like to start by quickly telling you 1 minute about the IMC. It is the IoT M2M Council. They're the sponsor of this event. It is a large trade organization, one of the largest, frankly, probably the largest in the world that deals with IoT related efforts, if you will. There are a number of board companies who are represented on the board, and then the council itself has about 25,000 plus, maybe even close to 30,000 member companies that receive the information that the IMC sends out periodically. There are newsletters that you can sign up for, and there are events like this that the IMC sponsors. If you become a full board member, you have the opportunity to present at events like these, and also multiple webinars and special IoT events that the organization hosts over the year. I think the next one's probably coming up around the March timeframe. So if you're interested, please go to the IMC website and check it out. Okay. Now, I'm going to get started with introductions first, and then come back around to the theme of the panel, and then talk about the essential information that you all need to know about what we're up to. We are going to spend some time talking about AI and IoT before we get to the security aspects of what AI can do for IoT, because I think this is a new field for us, if you will, right? Everyone is getting interested in implementing AI solutions that are part of an IoT solution. So let's set the definitions, let's set the terms, and then we can figure out how are we going to work with IoT. So I'd like to start with Ellen. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hi, good morning. So my name is Ellen Boehm, and I'm the SVP of IoT strategy at a company called Keyfactor. We are a cybersecurity software company. We've been around for about 20 years, and we specialize in public key infrastructure. We issue certificates, and we do certificate management. My background is in IoT product development. I've worked in smart cities and smart home before coming into the security side of things about 5 years ago.
Hi, I'm Charlie Key. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of LowSand. We are an application enablement platform for building IoT applications. We've spent most of our time in a number of segments, from industrial IoT, connecting equipment, remote monitoring, doing smart buildings, and spending a lot of time in the telco space where they're using our platform to deliver a number of different applications. I'm an engineer by, education. I don't get to build things anymore, so I get to talk to folks and spend a lot of time with their customers and partners. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Hello, my name is Fred Yentz. I am the CEO of a company called IoT Launch, which is a consultancy that helps companies enable their products and services or their enterprises with IoT. We kind of go up and down the stack. We've got people on the team that have been very experienced hardware builders, network management, network builders, as well as application providers. My history is long-term, kind of IoT and tech guy. I was the CEO of Talent IoT platforms for quite some time. We've got another company called Tartibit, which has an IoT bridge. It's a middleware. So up and down the stack, we look at kind of how we implement IoT. Like Charlie, I'm an engineer by trade. I don't get to do much building anymore, so I spend a lot of time talking about IoT and helping customers build successfully. So look forward to today.
Thank you very much. And just to close that out, I'm Z Hussain. I'm the founder of a company called Ares Communications. We're headquartered here in California, in San Jose, California, but we have global cellular IoT services around the world. I am literally one of the founders. In another week or so, I will be celebrating my 28th year with the company. We've been in this space for a long, long time. Tens of millions of devices, all cellular IoT, for a variety of different IoT solutions, all the way from connectivity, which is where we take over from the mobile network operators, the carriers, if you will, all the way through application solutions, whether it's cloud-based or the application in the handset for a given entity. We serve car companies, we serve IoT deployments for enterprises. That's our key. That's our core, in the sense that you can come in any part of that entire chain from the network all the way to the back end. And that's what we do. Okay. So let me dive right in by starting with some questions with regard to setting the expectations for what I hope you all will take away from this panel. So the first slide, I want to set some definitions. Okay. First of all, something to keep in mind that the term artificial intelligence has been around for a long, long time. It was coined by Professor John McCarthy at Dartmouth College in 1955, almost 70 years ago. And indeed, he picked that term to distinguish AI from the 2,000 years of people trying to make human automata, I think is the right word I would use, to mimic the human being with machines. That was what he chose to do with AI. In 56, he had a large workshop in Dartmouth for an entire summer where he invited people like Marvin Minsky, whom you may have heard of, Claude Shannon, who was essentially the writer of the Shannon's theorem that you may be familiar with, et cetera, et cetera. 17 or 18 people attended a workshop the entire summer. I had the pleasure of working with a student of Marvin Minsky when I was in college, and so my first AI course was in the mid 70s, and so it's been around for quite a while. I'm going to have some questions, and I'll start with Ellen in a moment to give us a little bit of a comparison between generative AI and traditional AI, if you will. Set those definitions. I hate to use the word different because they're both sort of aspects of AI. I don't want to say that they are so different that they can't be related. Indeed, they are related, but the question is, how can AI help IoT? That's where we need to get to. And then we'll get to how can we help ensure the security of the IoT networks and devices, that, the theme for the panel, if you will, et cetera. I'm not going to go through many more slides at all. In fact, I'm going to go right back to the people who are on the panel over here. I'm going to start my first question with Ellen. She gave us, in a different setting some time back, I forget how long ago it was, she gave us a very good definition of generative AI compared to traditional AI. So I'd like to start by asking you to elaborate on that, please.
Sure. Thank you. So generative AI is something that I think if anyone's used ChatGPT or has a child in middle school like I do, and they tried to write a paper and typed in there, give me a report about so and so, that's an example of having a person that basically uses human input and then puts it into something and outspits a poem or outspits something that they couldn't have created on their own. And that can be used, but that also can be dangerous. I think we'll get into some questions here in a little bit about risks of that. But the point is that that's not going away. This new technology, we have to figure out how to use it for good, right? And understand how it might be used in a negative way, because that is possible. So it really is, again, models that now are self-training, that are getting better based on a variety of inputs. And now we have more processing capability to be able to do this. So again, I think it's something we're all trying to figure out how to leverage within businesses to make us more efficient, to put out more marketing content, for perhaps more targeted messages, more real time, or even from a development perspective, how to maybe iterate on code. So those are some of the things that we're exploring. But again, it's really, from my perspective, I'll talk a little bit about image. Like the whole deep fake type thing is how do you be able to trust the these models and what they're generating. So there's a lot we can kind of go into there, but that's a start.
Thank you very much, Ellen. Charlie, I'd like to frame the next question to you. Where does AI live in the IoT chain? Where do you see it being implemented? With your company's background and role in providing platforms for IoT, how does it all fit together?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I look at AI, both from a generative standpoint and what I think about is from a machine learning, traditional AI, and kind of what we see from a data perspective, I think there's multiple places in the value chain. Like Ellen just put, the generative standpoint is input prompts, it's output, a lot of text or code, traditional words. Where we're seeing a lot of our focus in the AI world is helping companies build and use models against their data for their equipment. So, pulling that data in and running it against to build predictive maintenance models, to do vibration analysis on rotating part machines. We're seeing those types of focus and where our world is. And from a platform standpoint, we believe that our job is to make it as easy as possible to use your data and in order to, whether it's a predictive model, whether it's a useful life, all of these different areas from an equipment standpoint. That's a lot of what we see today. I think we're going to see more and more AI from what I like to think of as almost virtual sensors, right? Tearing a digital twin down to individual pieces and using models to predict what is happening from a sensor perspective. So as we look at buildings, from a HVAC standpoint, from occupancy, traffic, how do we use this data in order to predict, in order to more efficiently run our buildings, more efficiently run our companies and our equipment. And so we're seeing a lot of that from a focus on the data perspective. The generative part, we just don't touch that much from our standpoint.
Thank you. Fred, you've been involved in IoT for a long, long time and have seen sort of literally the entire chain that's associated with IoT, whether it's the device out in the field with the cellular, for example, effort at Telit and other places like that, including platforms, and then all the way to the application, if you will. Can you elaborate a little bit? And so we're going to start diving a little bit into what security issues can crop up in that IoT chain. So I'd like you to sort of describe that chain and where security might fit in the chain. Where is it most effective? And then we can talk about how AI might affect that in the next few questions.
Okay, great. So, IoT is a technology that's built on layers, as he said. You've got a device layer, a network layer, an application or a cloud layer. And everybody talks about, security and safety and threats and surfaces. And unfortunately, you might have a great device and a bad network in a poor application space, and you have an unsecure and a bad implementation of a solution. You might have a great network and a great cloud and an unsecure device, and you might have, again, the same poor outcome. So it's interesting as people look at IoT security, you really have to have domain expertise and some awareness on these three layers. When we look at the AI and the networks, how do you detect anomalies in the network? How do you detect anomalies in a device behavior or network traffic? So there's all kinds of ways to add AI at these layers, or even at the edge. How do you put smarter, firmware models down in the device itself? So each layer has to really be treated almost independently to get some best practices out of it. But when you look at a device in a network and an application combined, that's where you have to start looking at the security of a solution. And I think that's something that's frequently overlooked. We might even talk about some things that are happening with the FCC and some things around safe IoT and what that really means for us. But it's a multi-layered problem, and it has to be addressed at each layer.
Thanks, Fred. Ellen, let me go back to one of the things that I think you had also touched on briefly, the role of AI in IoT solutions in general, not just security-based, but why is it important? Why are people looking at it? What's going on?
So I think why use AI in IoT is, again, to try to drive more efficiencies and understand, how are the edge devices operating, and how can we collect more information to make better decisions about how to run our factories or how to run our facilities. And so I think it's something that we can leverage, again, when it comes to using data models to make better decisions about that. So I think, again, it's back to can you trust the algorithms, and can you trust the what it's telling you to do? And so that's where we get into the security piece of it, is understanding, well, what was the input, and then can you make a decision to make an output based on that?
Thanks. Charlie, how can we use AI to detect bad actors, threats, security issues that may be creeping into a solution?
Yeah. We see it, as Fred mentioned, at different layers, right? If we think about bad actors, you've got these different points of access, both into the application, into the device, into the local system. Again, from our perspective, we're looking at it in a couple different ways, right? Those bad actors are either physically taking over a device, then you're looking at detection from the data coming in and from the network traffic itself. And so, you have multiple pieces there where those bad actors are going to be have if you've got physical access to a device, our view is you've basically already lost that device, right? And then you're really focused on the network traffic and from the data perspective, and looking at anomalous data, looking at data that does not look like it has in the past. And this is where the model from an AI standpoint becomes really important, because you can train those relatively quickly and keep training those pretty quickly on what normal looks like and what that normal state looks like. And from a bad actor standpoint, that's kind of where we think about it and focus a lot is okay, let's make sure the data coming in is looking appropriate and the network traffic is looking appropriate. And so that's kind of where we think about it and focus a lot.
Thanks very much. Fred, you mentioned best practices. Can you elaborate on the security best practices, whether it's the device or, all the way northbound, if you will, to the cloud and the application delivery to an ultimate end user? What are the best practices that make sense from a security perspective?
Well, here's where I think you get a lot of challenges in IoT. And I'm not going to pick on anybody. I'm going to use some analogies, but if a hyperscale cloud company, there's a few of them out there, if they had it their way, there would be a Cat6 cable connected to every cow wandering in a field, right? They don't understand that IoT is, low power, low bandwidth, economical devices that are out to create data inputs. So if you talk from a cloud point of view, they're going to talk about certificates, and they're going to talk about SSL, secure transactions to devices, and all these things. And unfortunately, when you get into the IoT world, a lot of the low power devices that are out there today, you're going to be running maybe unencrypted, but through a carrier-based tunnel, an APN. I would say that's a common practice. I don't know that we would call that necessarily a best practice going forward. So there's a big difference between common practices and best practices. On the northbound side of the IoT core, to the application, another thing that we see is the common practice is you terminate your IoT data into the network, and then you talk to your network provider and you get a VPN from the network provider to your application. And that's costly, and it's frequently slow when working with the network providers to get them changed or provisioned. And if you don't manage the information well on the northbound side with your hosted Cisco ASN router and your firewalls and everything else, you have all kinds of threat surfaces. So what was common practice may not necessarily be best practice. So we see operators sometimes moving towards maybe even what I call data delivery service, as opposed to just terminated device data and then a VPN to your cloud, and good luck, customer. And if you're in a device transaction mode, now what you can do is you can start using what I call IT best practices, because who's in charge these days when it comes to security? It's the it's the chief information officer, it's a chief security officer. It's probably not the ops guy that used to worry about IoT. So I think we're going to see in IoT a big shift in what we call best practices, and I think they will start to become common practices. I don't know if that's where you want to take the question, but
that's a good place to go. I think it's incredibly important. I think you've identified that security has been a key issue for a number of years now with IoT. I mean, the first time I got involved in looking at it was more than 20 years ago. So it's a big deal. And now the question is, how can we improve on that? That's the key that we're trying to get to over here. So, Ellen, let me get back to a question that I think would be good for you to answer. What kind of risks do you see when you need to deploy an IoT application that has AI, and how do you manage those risks?
Yes. So, continuing with the security theme, I'll talk about, again, trust and transparency. And so let's have an example of let's say there is an accident, right? You have you crashed your car and you have to take photos and send them to your insurance company. How can the insurance company trust that, okay, this photo really is of your car and the damage that was done in that accident and that sort of thing? So when I was talking earlier about generative AI, and from a photos or images perspective, it's really important. And we have projects where we've done this, where you basically take an image and you have to understand the origin of it and is it authentic, and how do you track and manage that over time? So it's really, and we do this cryptographically by signing the images. So it's basically, can you prove who who created this, and then can you prove over time, and this is where the generative part comes in, how it's been edited and how it's been modified, because there's nothing wrong with that. Again, as long as you can prove that it was modified by the right person and then used for the intended purpose, and not modified to then say, okay, well, I'm going to try to do some insurance fraud because this really wasn't my car, but I want to get this dent fixed. So those are the kind of things that we're thinking about, is how to be able to use this technology, so that, again, we're expanding our businesses, but we're doing it in such a way that we again, we can trust what's coming out of it. So that's kind of one of the things that I think about, is how do we really understand, again, the origin, and then have a record of how things are being modified. And the way that we do that is by using, again, certificates, signature verification, and then cryptographically binding identities to these things.
Thank you. Charlie, Ellen mentioned the concept of trust, which clearly is extremely important over here. How do we trust not just the data, but the modeling itself, right? What have you done for the machine learning part of it and the modeling part of it that makes you believe that the AI implementation will work well?
Yeah, this is a tough question in general, right? Obviously we know generative models right now, like, those are coming from massive companies, and so you have to decide whether you trust that company or not, and then therefore trust the model. That's one thing. I think it gets more complicated as we think about the wide variety of models that corporations and enterprises are going to be implementing for anything, in their ecosystem, whether that's on the IoT side or anywhere else in the business. And a lot of that's going to come from a base model. So, okay, do I trust where this base model come from? Do I trust, the data that was trained on, and so that's kind of where we start and think about, like, obviously you're going to learn over time that these are the models that we like from a business standpoint to start from our beginning point. And then I think maybe even the hard part is, okay, we're going to continue to modify and train this model on new data. All right, where's that new data coming from? Or how would we verify it? Are we doing manual verification on this to some extent? Are we using data sets that we know have already been cleansed and verified as well? And that I think that's going to be a part machine and part human process in order to understand and trust those models, in order to make sure that our data has been cleaned, it's been verified, all of the appropriate information is there that we're putting into the models to train them. And so, I think that's maybe even the harder part, is making sure that we're doing the right thing with our data as we're pushing and training these new models, and which are going to, be in numerous counts. So I think that's a part human, part machine type of process right now.
Thank you very much. Fred, you have a ton of experience with helping companies develop IoT solutions, devices, products. In particular, the experience that you had with IoT devices in the cellular IoT world, in particular with Telit. If a company is starting to look at AI to help them deploy an IoT solution that uses AI techniques, where do they get started if they don't have the internal expertise? What would you recommend? The kind of things that they should be looking at. And I may throw that question to the other folks as well after you're done with it.
Well, that's a broad topic. There's members at the IMC you could reach out to. There are organizations, there's companies. All three of us maybe in the panel could help you. But the biggest thing I see in the IoT space, where companies kind of get a false start and start to fail, whether they want to use AI or not isn't the problem. It's usually, what is the objective of the solution? Is it clearly defined? What are the expected outcomes? And you will come up with the unexpected in your plan, right? And maybe you could use AI to figure out what you should do. Maybe you start with AI there as opposed to how to protect it and use it. But I think, keep it simple, stupid, right? Start out easy. If you have, I'll give an example, right? So we've got one of our clients is global container management for breach detection. When a container is opened in a port and it's not supposed to be opened, something might be stolen or potentially drugs or other paraphernalia might be inserted. So trafficking and things like that. These are massive data sets. There's millions of containers on the water and on ports every day. When a door opens, sometimes it's supposed to open and sometimes it's not supposed to open. Sometimes customs inspected, sometimes customs didn't inspect. And there's data everywhere. And mining this data and having the single point of trust and truth in a data set is interesting. And how this is happening is there's so much common source data, but there's many different subscribers to that data. So they're employing things like blockchain to make sure that a common source of data is used by the right people, but they can only see what they want to see. So, every time you walk into a solution, you find that there are things that an IoT developer maybe didn't expect. And right now we're coming up against it and we're seeing that AI can indeed help in doing things like anomaly detections of a door that opened in a port that the customs never inspects there. It may not get, you may not have a real-time report that customs did inspect, but you know that they never have. So there's an anomaly there. And you can't do that manually. There's just too much data to do those kinds of intuitional kind of outcomes.
No, that's an excellent point. And Ellen, could you add more to that particular question with regards to if people need resources and help, not just for the IoT application, but for AI within the IoT application? Who can they turn to? What resources besides the ones that Fred mentioned in the IMC could be?
Yeah, so the only thing I was thinking about is if there's other like industry consortiums or groups that are specific to the space that you're in. Like for example, in smart home, there's the Matter protocol, and that's again a lot for interoperability. But again, it's to establish trust between different vendors, so that when you go and you outfit your smart home with a thermostat and a doorbell and a smart refrigerator, that all of those things can kind of communicate with each other and trust each other. So I would say maybe perhaps that would be a source, is just to see kind of what within the industry is being leveraged, because that is part of the conversations, I think, for all of these groups now, is how do we use that?
Charlie, can you also add to that?
Yeah, I the first thing that would come to my mind is, okay, who are the people that we already work with that potentially have knowledge, both in our industry, our expertise, and know us, know our company, whether that's a systems integrator or whoever else potentially may have some knowledge and practice around the AI side. That's kind of where I would start. And I think the rest of these answers are fantastic is part of it all. But that's kind of where my head first goes is, okay, who do we already know that may already know us, know our business, be able to get up to speed really quickly, have data science expertise, and be able to help us think about this from a strategic standpoint, from a tactical and execution standpoint.
Okay. I have one more question that I'd like to ask all three of you. We'll start with Fred down the line over here. Where will AI be in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months with regards to IoT, not necessarily just AI in general? I mean, there's a lot of effort going into this, and a lot of people are looking at it from all kinds of different applications. But in IoT, where do you think, what are your thoughts and predictions that you might come up with?
I think what you're going to have is better predictive models. Like, it's going to be in model refinement, because right now most of your IoT solutions have some type of a anomaly detection or asset management or maintenance management type solution embedded in them, and those were crafted by humans and they aren't tuned typically. So I think you're going to see just radical improvement of some of these models. And they'll probably be generated and then they'll be verified by people, and then because that's what they're going to trust, and then they're going to put them back in. So I don't know that you're going to see an enormous, and maybe this is taboo for the panel, but I don't know that you're going to see an enormous amount of AI kind of resident in, but I think you're going to see AI applied to a lot of IoT solutions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. I think we're still in the learning phase of what AI can do, let alone what AI can do for IoT. So Ellen, do you have any thoughts about 12 to 24 months down the road, short to medium term?
Sure. Yeah. So when I first walked into the show, I saw the Samsung booth and it said AI for all, right? And it's like every single booth has AI somewhere printed on it, and if you don't, then you're nobody. And it's kind of like, so yeah, I feel like that it's here. Everyone's trying to figure out how to use it for their benefit. I do agree with Fred that I think it's going to be iterative, and we're going to be working on improving it. I think, again, I mentioned earlier, I think more companies will be using it from a marketing perspective and from generating content perspective, getting out messages, being able to do like regional specific, um, sort of creation to try to sell their products. So not so much again on the IoT product itself, but in terms of just trying to get the messages out, I see that as an easier way and something that people are doing already with the chat bots and from a support perspective and that kind of thing. The only other thing I can think of is maybe from a code-based perspective is to be able to use some models to help iterate more quickly through the design phase and to then release prototypes much faster and then test out if it's going to work or if it meets the features and functionality needed. And then but again, still have some verification of the developer going in and saying making sure that none of that code was malware or again, that goes back to you've got to sign your firmware and then know who wrote it and have the proper process for managing your code. But so that's maybe where I would see it being leveraged, because again, we're just trying to use our smart brains and our engineering and product people to be putting their focus into something useful and using maybe some of these algorithms to iterate code in a faster way.
Charlie, I'm going to ask you the question in a few seconds, but before I do that, just one quick interruption. We're going to have a time for a few questions at the end. There is a microphone over here. If you have some questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, please come on up to the microphone so we can have it on the recording that will be made available later on. Charlie, what do you think are the next 12 to 24 months going to see in terms of AI and AI for IoT?
I think about it in a few different areas. The science of AI, right? This is the core research building of new models, different methods, new ways of using AI. That's going to accelerate at a rapid pace just because of the investment that we're seeing on the R&D side, the massive level of companies that are investing from a research standpoint. Now, the actual application is going to be slow. It's hard to see how a lot of large enterprises and even medium and smaller enterprises are ready to trust and verify and understand the usage of this. The usage that is already there, like Fred mentioned, like it's going to be applied more and more. It's going to be applied across different machines, across different assets. The other area where I think is really interesting that we're going to see an acceleration over the next 12 to 24 months is on the image side and video and image analysis. Thinking about how that is applied to different areas. Things like Amazon Go. The pick up and go kind of shopping. That's a single use case, but that was a test case, right? They're using that to build models. That's a data input, and we're going to see different data applied on a visual standpoint. I think quite a bit over the next couple of years. Maybe push it out another year after that. But I think we're going to see a lot of video and image work on the AI side with IoT.
Do any of you see any additions to IoT security that's going to be evolving in the next few years, even though we're still in the learning phase for just what AI can do in general, right? It is a hype, it is a buzzword, and I think we have to be careful that we're not thinking that the whole world can be solved with everything AI, right? That I think is a extreme position, and it's too early. We've been, best way to say it, is excited by all of the chat GPT generative AI stuff that is being done. It is making it accessible people. And I think that's the key point I will make over here, is that people are learning about what some of these techniques can do for you. And the question is, where do we go from here? I want to ask the audience if there are any questions that they would like to ask the panel, and if you can come up to the mic. If not, then I'll continue with a few more questions in the time that we have left. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
A question. You're one of the smartest guys up here, and you're asking the questions.
I don't know about that.
What do you think is going to happen in the network? And
that's
security?
a darn good question. It's kind of interesting. If I look at what's happening in the generative AI phase, I think that's where AI hits the road, the rubber meets the road for people. That's the key point. I mean, we've been using AI techniques, machine learning techniques in our network for a long, long time. It's been at least 7 or 8 or 9 years that we began analyzing our network metadata, not the content of the IoT data that was being transmitted, but the metadata that came from the network, telling us about issues and problems that we could detect with the IoT devices out there. Because IoT devices aren't necessarily, consumer IoT, yes, but in our case, enterprise IoT devices don't necessarily have a human being tied to it. And if you see patterns that don't look like a machine, you start seeing patterns that look like a human, then you know something is wrong. And it's application specific. There's no doubt about that, right? So where we've been using machine learning and AI has been for analyzing scenarios like SIM theft, right? It's taken out of a mechanical machine device and moved to something else where it shouldn't be. And now you have people connecting to Google or Amazon to make purchases, to get information and do searches that a machine shouldn't do or wouldn't do for that particular application. So we've been using it already. To me, the whole aspect of generative AI and the interaction with humans to make that available information possible for support individuals use to help our customers is the next big step. That's what we're going to do. Is great. We have the data, we have the models, we're seeing what's coming through, improving the models, as you mentioned, Charlie, and making sure that they are appropriate. But how do you train a support staff member to say, something's wrong here, and take action? Now, ultimately, and this is perhaps beyond the 24-month phase, I am an optimist in that I think AI can start making those human decisions. That's ultimately the goal of traditional AI, right? You're trying to replace that human intelligence with something that's a little bit more automated because the data is enormous, absolutely enormous. So I think that's where things are going to go beyond 24 months, well beyond 24 months.
And I think when you get to that point, that's not an IoT solution anymore. You've collected a lot of IoT data, and now you're working on optimizing enterprise decisions and enterprise solutions with AI. And I think people, again, they get confused when they say AI for IoT or AI for enterprise or AI for apps. Where is it? And I think you're right. It's going to be used on the top when decisions and actions are made, and they'll probably be signed off by a human.
And yeah, it's going to be very applicative. And sorry, I don't mean to hog the panel. I mean, these are the experts over here, but it's going to be very specific to the application. I mean, a medical application where you want to make a decision about some issue has to be taken with a heck of a lot more care than if an HVAC system is providing you data that says something has been hacked. I mean, you're not going to put life at risk in an HVAC application necessarily, whereas a medical solution you might. And so you have to be very careful about where you implement the AI automation, which is ultimately where I think this is all going to go. We're down to the last couple of minutes. I'm going to ask once more if there's any question from the audience that they would like to ask. Everyone now knows exactly what AI is all about and how are you going to implement it in your IoT solution. Is that the panelists did a great job, I guess. Any final comments that I can get from all three of you about security and AI in general? Ellen, let's start with you.
Yes, sure. So I'll just reiterate again, it's all about initial root of trust and being able to establish that, a device that you're using, did you create it? What's the code that went on it? Who wrote that code? And then how has that code been modified? And then over time, as devices are in the field and they need to be updated or have firmware updates, you'll push those updates, but make sure the device verifies the code and checks it before installing it. So it's those basic things that I think are best practices that we have to continue to do as we move into this AI phase and layer that on top, so that again we can trust what we're going to be doing with these algorithms.
Charlie, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think from a security perspective, things that you mentioned, the anomaly detection is going to be a great place for companies to think about starting. One, because you can add a simple, even manual verification process on the back end if needed. If it's a critical system, obviously you're going to want some level of verification. So I think from a security perspective, I think we can start in the anomaly detection, whether that's looking for bad actors, looking for anomalies in our security data, all of the different things there. So that's kind of where I think is a good place to start from a security perspective.
Fred, final thoughts.
We're out of time, but I'll say two quick things. One, thank you, Z. Two, for the people that do want to start, and I think we left one group of folks that can help you. You can also reach out to select universities. There's public-private partnerships. There's funding available. Some are done by NSF or the NIST. There's all kinds of different projects and programs. And if your industry is tied to that, you might find a university that is also studying in this space, and they can also assist you. So with that, I'll close.
Fantastic. I'd like to thank the panelists. So please, a round of applause for the information that they provided you. And I'd like to thank you all as well for attending. It was an early morning event. Thank you very much for being here, and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the show. Thank you.